Hey y'all, and welcome to Politibrawl. My name is Brian, and this star witness just crushes Jamie Raskin, who asks not only a ridiculous question, but doesn't understand what has actually been happening to our military under Joe Biden. Let's dive in.
The Army decided that it wanted to rename military bases that had been named not after U.S. generals, but after Confederate generals who joined the Confederacy in rebellion against the Union. So, like Fort Benning was renamed after a pro-Union, pro-American general. Fort Gordon was renamed as Fort Eisenhower. Fort Hill was renamed as Fort Walker. And yet, I take it this is part of the big anti-woke arraignment and indictment of the military that we have renamed military bases after pro-Union, pro-American soldiers, generals, people who've been loyal and faithful to the Union, as opposed to those who have opposed the Union and took up arms against the Union in traitorous insurrection. Now, what you're saying is that we should have Army bases named after Confederate generals or Nazi generals, people we've defeated in war. Is that right?
I'm not willing to let you put words in my mouth.
We're about 2 minutes over here, so we're just going to let Mr. Lohmeier finish, and that's it.
So my point is, this is not an issue in which I've actively been involved. The renaming of bases. I wrote a book about Marxist DEI, Marxist critical race theory. That's my expertise. I have no personal issue with the fact that this gentleman to my left, who honorably served his country, has been a part of a commission to do that. I have personal opinions about why it's wrong-headed and a part of an ideological push, but this is not my issue.
You would not have renamed them, in other words?
Well, we're point of order. 2.5
That's not something I ever focused on.
All right, I think I got my answer, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back to you.
For Mr. Biggs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the witnesses being here today. So, Mr. Lohmeier, I'm interested to know your reaction to his positions with regard to the diversification of the military.
Sure.
And DEI.
Thank you. One point that the general made with which I disagree is that diversity is our strength. I don't think there's any evidence for that, but definitions matter. Words matter, and we're losing touch with this. I would reject the notion that diversity is our strength based on DEI definitions of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Merit-based, okay, I'm going to get away from that because if we're trying to find a unity of understanding, let me say this. Skill and performance matter in the military if you'd like to deter conflict and win our nation's wars, period. As a commander in the military, I had a black colonel fly across the country to promote me to lieutenant colonel because I love the hell out of the guy and respect his views on the Federalist Papers, which he was teaching me after work hours, and because he was the best leader I've ever worked with. The best airman that I had working for me, incidentally, was a transgender airman. So don't bullshit me and say that you think you know what you're talking about. You've never served. You don't understand how this works. We care about performance in the military, period. You don't know what you're talking about. Most of the people in this room don't know what they're talking about. We need lethality in the military, period. All of the stuff you guys talk about, the men and women in uniform don't think about. They go play Call of Duty at night after they learn their mission and execute that mission, period. They don't know what you're talking about. They don't know what you're voting on. They don't care about your sexual preference. They don't care what you look like, and they don't care what the person next to them looks like, period. I'm a citizen of this country, and I can dislike you and criticize you all I want here, but our men and women in uniform cannot. And so I speak on their behalf when I say lethality matters, merit-based selection and promotions matter, and your ideology doesn't matter one bit. And we need to identify principles which will preserve our union and preserve the unity of the United States military. If we do not, we'll lose that union.
Merit matters, ladies and gentlemen, particularly when it comes to our military. Diversity is not a strength in the military, ladies and gentlemen. The merit of that person, however, is what matters. Are you able to follow the orders? Are you able to do your job? Are you able to trust the man next to you? That's what matters in the military. And I'm not saying that from experience, but I can say that as somewhat of a military historian here. Not only does merit matter, words and rhetoric matter. First off, I've got to deal with the very issue that Jamie Raskin keeps on bringing up for some insipid reason. It's not just the idea of renaming certain military installations. It's not about renaming certain ships. That's not the issue here. The issue is we've gotten to a point where we don't need to honor the Confederacy anymore. I can say that as a Southern boy. Okay? I used to think that the Confederacy was an amazing thing. And I thought that as a kid. As I grew older and started studying more, actually learning what they did, I changed my tune very quickly. Because I am a rational thinking adult, unlike Jamie Raskin, who is being ridiculous, asking a question that has nothing to do with what this witness, Mr. Lohmeier, is talking about. Okay? Furthermore, by the way, since definitions actually do matter, the South rebelled. It tried to go away from the United States. It tried to leave and be its own thing. That's rebellion, that's sedition, that's not being a traitor. A traitor is someone like Benedict Arnold, who quite literally sold out the United States. He was about to deliver the entire plans and stronghold of West Point, which is now our premier military academy, and he was going to hand that over to the British because he was angry at the Continental Congress. So that's what being a traitor looks like, Jamie. So you can quit throwing this ridiculous red meat, and maybe you should focus instead on what Lohmeier has been talking about constantly. Let's see, I'm trying to remember the book. Yeah, he wrote something called Irresistible Revolution, Marxism's Goal of Conquest and the Unmaking of the American Military. And he knows about that firsthand because he was actually a fighter pilot in the military. He flew in the Air Force. He flew F-15s. That usually means you're a tough guy. That means you can handle a whole lot of pressure, and you are handling some of the highest grade military equipment ever created. And so you don't need diversity to do that. You need merit. You need the content of character. But under Lloyd Austin, who was the head of the military under Joe Biden, they cared more about, and this is the theory here, about widening the pool of military recruits by trying to go with DEI. That's the nice version of the story. The reality is DEI is often used by Marxists and cultural Marxists in order to rot institutions from within. And here's a better way to describe the issue. Following the thought of Italian Marxist Antonio Gramsci, the cultural neo-Marxist oppressor versus oppressed ideology of CRT/DEI is one that highlights personal differences. In America, pigmentation seems to work well, in order to intentionally divide and create distrust in the military context among its service members. In other words, DEI is quite literally being used to rot the military from within. Diversity is not a strength, ladies and gentlemen. More often than not, it's a weakness. Diversity of thought can be a good thing as long as your brain isn't so open-minded that it just falls out. Diversity of thought, diversity of spirit, diversity of race, none of that matters when you are in the military. When you take an oath that you'll follow orders, when you go through basic training, when you have to deal with the reality that you might not be coming back home. And if you do, there's going to be a flag over what remains. And Lloyd Austin decided to allow cultural Marxism a place at the table for our American military. Our military has one of the toughest jobs on the planet, and that is quite literally ensuring that global trade continues. If you ever look at a map of U.S. bases, they're around pretty much three areas. The areas we used to occupy after World War II, surrounding Russia, and making sure that the straits of places like the Straits of Malacca, which is in Indonesia, the Strait of Hormuz, which is in between the United Arab Emirates and Iran, the Red Sea, Suez Canal, Panama Canal, all of these major highways of global trade quite literally rely on the fact that the American military is there standing guard. I dread to think what happens when we do finally get to the point where we retract our military. There's a whole different can of worms that can be opened up in that discussion, so I won't go down that road. But the reality is we protect global trade. We don't just protect American interests. We do way more. That is a testament to the strength of America. And when you use something, when you bring in something that tries to rot that integral structure from within, that makes my blood boil. I'm trying my best to hold down my anger at this, but Jamie Raskin should be caring about the very thing that cultural Marxism does, that can rot the American military from within, and he is caring more about semantics, throwing around words like traitors, and then talking about renaming renaming old bases. Now, granted, the whole reason for having Confederate names to begin with was to basically throw a bone to the Southerners who were, let's be honest, still a little bit angry about losing the war. We can have that conversation later. We can have the conversation about renaming things later, and that's one that I'm actually interested in having. But this is something different entirely. Having cultural Marxism with the implicit understanding that it's going to rot things from within. That's the plan. That's the goal, according to the Marxist Gramsci. And allowing that into the American military has to be one of the most evil things you can do. And Jamie Raskin should be ashamed of himself for not bothering to ask those questions. Meanwhile, the Republican Party seems like they care about the integrity of the American military, and so does Mr. Lohmeier, who has written extensively on the subject and got kicked from his job because of it. That's the reality, ladies and gentlemen. Marxism, folks. Not even once. Folks, my name is Brian. Hope you enjoyed that segment here on Politibrawl. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Catch you on the next one. Until then, y'all have a good one.